Good afternoon and welcome to Recruiting Blog's webinar on hiring for HCAHPS. My name is Anna Brecka and I'm here today with our friends from SkillSurvey who are going to share how HR can impact patient satisfaction score. And as you all know, it starts with recruiting the best talent. During the presentation today, we want you to know that this session is being recorded. And as an attendee, you have the possibility of asking questions as we go through the presentation, and we will try to get to our question or your questions at the end of the presentation during Q&A. For you to ask a question, we ask you to use the chat feature that you'll find at the upper right-hand corner on your video screen. Just write in your question and hit enter, and we will take your questions as we go. Mike, who is joining us today, is the VP of the Eastern Region of SkillSurvey. Mike has been a consultant, sales, and marketing professional for over 22 years, helping companies to maximize the potential of their employees and the technology that they use. He is a regular speaker and extremely knowledgeable about everything within HCAHPS. So with that, Mike, I hand you the mic and the presentation and the audience.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you everybody for attending today's session. I got a chance to see the attendee list, and we have quite a breadth and depth of individuals who have shown up for today's session. Again, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to learn about a fairly interesting topic. It's something that I've been speaking about for over 3 years now, and it is hiring for HCAHPS, how HR can impact patient satisfaction scores. It's an interesting linkage, one that not a lot of organizations will make in the healthcare space. The fact that patient satisfaction scores and HCAHPS can be influenced by HR. So I congratulate you on signing up for a webinar with this as its topic. So I've got two broad goals here today. One is we're going to dive into a definition and explanation of what HCAHPS is. What is that ugly acronym that you've seen flying around the office, and how can it potentially impact your organization's business? But much more specifically, this presentation is about how can HR impact those patient satisfaction scores. Something that's been a skeptical topic for many organizations that I speak with. But as time has gone on and the financial impact of HCAHPS has hit, it's become more and more topic in the hallways of healthcare organizations that we speak with on a regular basis. So again, I'm not going to try and get into too much detail on the law and the act itself, just enough so that you'll know what its intent is, how it can hit your organization, and then again, as I said, how you can have an impact. If I had all of you in a room, which I often will do this in person, I would typically ask two questions and ask for a show of hands. How many of you are familiar with HCAHPS? And if you're a typical audience, and this number has grown over time, over the past 2 or 3 years, familiar with HCAHPS, I'm getting maybe about a 60% response rate. However, the second question, how many of you have HR programs in place to contribute to your hospital's HCAHPS results? It's less than half of those 60. So we're probably talking about 20 to 30% of an audience will have programs in place that are designed to impact HCAHPS results. And that is what we're talking about today. If you haven't thought about it yet, this is a train that's left the station and it's coming your way. It's going to happen. At some level, the responsibility for HCAHPS, patient satisfaction scores, is going to circle its way back to the HR department. And if this is your first step, welcome. If this is you're already on the train, welcome as well. But I'm trying to arm you with as much information as possible so that you can understand where you're headed. So here's our agenda for the webinar today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the voice of the consumer. I'll explain that in just a minute. HCAHPS itself, a quick overview of the Act and its importance. where the rubber hits the road, which is the financial impact it can and has had with healthcare organizations. And then really where we're going to get the meat of the presentation today is HR, recruiting, and how you should and can interface with HCAHPS and have an impact on it. Before I go into the voice of the consumer, though, the first item on the agenda, let's start very broadly and have you at least understand what we're talking about today. For those of you that are truly novices to the Act, that HCAHPS acronym stands for Hospital Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, and is it a way to ask patients to rate their experiences at a hospital. And let me be clear about that. It's talking about experiences. It's not so much did you cure my problem? Did I come out healthier than when I went in? It is much more about how I felt about my interaction at the hospital. Was I communicated with? Did I have, was my room quiet? Was I able to sleep? Was I communicated with? It's these things that HCAHPS is measuring more so than the quality of the care that you actually received. You know, when I got my knee replaced, did it get infected? It's not asking those sorts of things. So let's cover the 3 bullets on the right here. HCAHPS scores represent a patient's perspective of care that allow for objective and meaningful comparisons of hospitals. Meaning we're taking these feelings that patients have about their interactions with the healthcare organization, but objectively comparing those hospitals among each other. And then publicly reporting those results to provide incentives for hospitals to improve their quality of care. And then increase the transparency of the quality of hospital care in return for the public investment. In other words, putting the information out there so that the government can actually stick their nose in the business of how they're going to reimburse healthcare organizations based on how patients feel about their data. That's really what it comes down to. It's the government impacting revenue for healthcare organizations based on how a patient felt about their stay at a hospital. So that's a broad stroke overview of what HCAHPS is. But before I go any more into the Act itself, let's talk about the voice of the consumer. So how did you used to, and maybe even you do it today a little bit, find out about, a good dentist or a carpenter, or how to get a good deal on a car? You asked a friend, a relative, somebody you knew and trusted to give you information about a restaurant you could go to or somebody that you could trust. But what's that evolved into? It's evolved into a system now that we're online sites for you to do that electronically. You've got Zagat's and Yelp and Angie's List giving you feedback on customer interactions with contractors, etc. And I'll just give you a real-life example. I'm a pretty handy guy. I take a lot of pride in my home. I do a lot of fixing, repairing, both inside and out. And I've got a lawn I'm fairly happy about and proud of. And I used a lawn care product, who shall at this point remain unnamed, on my lawn. And it took off. Tall, green, weed-free, as opposed to my neighbor's lawn right next to it, which was none of those. Short, brown, weedy. I was so proud of it that I actually took a picture of it with my lawn on the left, my neighbor's on the right, posted it on their website for a review, wrote a little review, and don't you know, about a week or two later, I've got like 5, 6 likes on my review. Number one, I'm proud, but I'm not telling you this because I need you to learn about my lawn, right? I'm telling you because this is the kind of environment we live in. Not only did somebody learn from my post, but I was proud to give it. That's kind of the environment we live in. It's not only an environment where people are learning from the reviews they see out there, but people love to give them. My wife gave a review of a vacation we took 2 years ago to Mexico, Riviera Maya down in Mexico. I highly recommend it, by the way. After about a month, she had 300 likes. She couldn't have been happier. It's kind of strange to think about that you're just happy that people are taking your advice and using it. The reason I'm telling you this, by the way, is that's the environment we live in, and that's the concept that has been applied to healthcare evaluations, using customer patient feedback in a way that helps you, a consumer of healthcare, to make better decisions about where you want to go. right? Look at the tagline at the bottom of this slide. Reviewing is the new advertising. Manufacturers of products and delivery companies of services are less and less relying on the marketing efforts, what they tell you about their product, and much more on what the users and consumers are telling you. And what was it? I bought a DVD player a year and a half ago. I used Consumer Reports to narrow it down to the 3 or 4 that, from a technology standpoint, were excellent. But then how did I make my final decision? Well, I went on Amazon and I read the reviews. If I saw some negative reviews, I steered away from that one. I ended up buying one that over time had the best reviews. People just like me said they liked it. And that's how I made my final decision. And I know I'm not alone. We're all in this together using customer feedback to help make decisions. So again, with that backdrop, let's talk about how it's being applied to healthcare. If there's anything that you want to take away from today's presentation, actually I hope you take away quite a few things, but maybe number one is that website that you see at the top slide there, medicare.gov/hospital compare. This is the website you would go to as a consumer to compare hospitals against each other on patient satisfaction. So if you want to decide where, certainly the quality of care, the surgeons that are available, or if you're having a baby, certainly their birthing centers, etc., are decision points for you. But if you want to include in your decision, how did other people feel about their stay? This is where you would do it. Literally type in your area in the search box, and it will produce for you a list of hospitals, acute care hospitals, within a radius of the location that you enter. You can choose up to 3, and again, compare them against each other. I just randomly chose New York here just to give you an idea of how it works. But I will tell you, when I do this presentation live in front of an audience, I will always pick that geographic region that I'm in. And without a doubt, the HR folks exactly what the government is hoping for. That healthcare organizations, knowing that their patient satisfaction data is out there for everyone to see, will be worried about it, concerned about it, be nervous about it, and thereby affect change on it, right? So that's exactly the effect that they're looking for. But let's see what it looks like. So I picked these 3 random hospitals in the New York City area, and I have just a few questions. This is actual data. I think I did this about 6-8 months ago. Look at these questions that are on the survey. Patients who reported that their nurses always communicated well. Okay, you see the 3 hospitals, and you see the New York state average and then the national average. Patients who reported that they always received help as soon as they wanted. The 3 hospitals and then the averages. Patients who reported that staff always explained about medicines before giving it to them. Right? The thing that I want you to understand, though, there's a couple things let's point out here. One is it uses the word always. The survey does include other options. There's an option for sometimes or never, but the only thing that matters for HCAHPS is always. If you score anything less, second, you're a loser. You only count always. So it's a pretty high bar that HCAHPS has set, above and beyond what many organizations already do today, perhaps through Press Ganey, et cetera. You're probably already doing some level of patient satisfaction gauging on your own. But what I'm talking about here is HCAHPS. And again, the only thing that matters is always. Patients who reported that the area around the room was always quiet at night. The other thing to key on here, too, is the reason that the averages are off to the right is because you can't just grade hospitals against each other. You have to understand what the average scoring is. For example, quiet at night. They all seem to be scoring a little low, maybe 50% or slightly under, but look at the New York average. These hospitals, if you understand New York City at all, are in fairly noisy areas. It's probably pretty difficult to have a quiet room at night. It just is. It's just a fact of life. So you really need to compare against the average to see if the hospital you're looking at is actually in effect scoring low or not. But again, this is right out there for everyone to see when you're looking for health care. And then it really comes down to this one. Patients who reported yes, they would definitely recommend the hospital. And again, you see these hospitals doing quite well, especially when compared against the average. So again, I just wanted to give you a flavor of what the questions look like and the types of things that HCAHPS is measuring. So that's voice of the consumer. Let's hit the next topic on my agenda, which is an overview of HCAHPS, the act itself, and then the importance. What impact could it potentially have? So this goes way back. In 2002, these two organizations partnered to form HCAHPS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, combined to create hospital consumer assessment of healthcare providers and systems. And you'll notice, intentionally, I bolded consumer assessment. This is not an assessment that the hospital does or that some government agency does. You do it as a consumer of healthcare, and you're reporting back your results. It had three broad goals: produce data about a patient's perspectives of care that allow objective and meaningful comparisons of hospitals, a public reporting system designed to create incentives to improve the quality of care, and again, enhance accountability in healthcare by increasing transparency in return for the public investment. Here's where the money hits, right? Here's where Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements to healthcare can be impacted by how somebody felt about their stay at your hospital. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. There's actually, I should have mentioned this when I first started, everybody that's attended today's session is going to get emailed to them an ebook that has a lot more detail on HCAHPS. So as a walk away, you'll get some detailed feedback on this, and it has a little bit more detail on this, for example. But here's the timeline. Started in 2005 with HCAHPS being endorsed by the National Quality Forum, and then in March 2008, at the bottom there, the very first public reporting occurred. So there's a lot of gaps. But again, just to give you an idea of what the timeline looked like. So the current survey, this is a survey, again, that patients are taking post-discharge. Consists currently of 32 questions, 21 evaluation questions about patient care. There's 2 global ratings on a scale of 0 to 10, and then there's a 4-point scale as well. And then a definitely no, from definitely no all the way up through definitely yes. So 4 screening questions, and then 5 demographic questions as well that are included in the 32, again, just to give you an idea. So again, I would recommend, if you take this topic seriously, and I hope you do, and I hope that by attending, you're going to understand the significance of this topic. You write down that website that you saw earlier, right? And I'll circle back on it at the end as well. But the other thing that's probably worthwhile for you to do is go to that website. You can get access to the survey. Go ahead, print it out, tape it to your wall. Understand what patients are being asked post-discharge. What kinds of things does the HCAHPS survey care about? So again, 2 things, that website and the survey itself, which you can get at that website as well. Print it out, understand it, know it. So the third topic, we are moving right along. I'm looking at my my watch, and we are right on schedule. So we're right where we should be at this point. Financial impact on hospitals. Here's where, you know, when I said I did this talk 3 years ago and nobody was listening. Well, you know why nobody was listening to me 3 years ago? Because the financial impact had not occurred. It was just a rumor. It was just a future. Well, guess what? The future's now. The impact is hitting today. So that's why all of a sudden people are signing up for webinars like this. It's because your CFO is looking for solutions to improving the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement hit that could occur as part of HCAHPS. So let's talk about that a little bit. So as part of HCAHPS, there is a value-based purchasing program that actually assigns value to the survey responses. All of this is built into the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which again adjusts Medicare inpatient fee-for-service payments, your reimbursements to hospitals beginning October 2012. Remember I said when I was doing this 3 years ago, nobody was listening? Well, starting in 2012, it started hitting. and it's transformed Medicare from a passive payer to an active purchaser of higher quality, more efficient health care. There are components to value-based purchasing that are quality of care based. You know, they're assessing readmission rates, infection rates, having to do with whether or not you were cured or treated well from a medical perspective. But what we're talking about today is simply the HCAHPS portion, patient satisfaction. And again, they're looking to reimburse you appropriately based on the care you're giving to your patients. And HCAHPS, the patient satisfaction portion of the hit that they can provide, or hit you with rather, is 30% of the calculation. So who pays? Well, the entire system is basically revenue neutral, meaning that CMS is able to withhold up to 1% of Medicare reimbursements in 2013, although that increases over time, as you'll see here. And it's designed to create a pool of funds, okay? So look at the second sub-bullet, provides incentives to hospitals based on quality of performance. Yes, if you are performing above average, you could actually get more money back than you used to, more Medicare reimbursements than you were used to. So it's creating this fund based on penalties provided to low scorers that is being given then to organizations that are doing great. So as it says there, hospitals may get more or less than they contributed. This withholding can increase by 0.25% each year. Well, it does increase, not can, but it does increase by 0.25% each year until the reduction reaches a total of 2% hit for fiscal year 2017 and beyond. So again, it's not just the 1% Medicare reimbursement hit. It goes up to 2% over the next 4 years. Now, 1% may not seem like a lot, 2% may not seem like a lot. Go tell that to your CFO and tell him he's going to lose 2% of his Medicare Medicaid reimbursements in today's economy. I haven't talked to a healthcare organization yet that's happy to give up even 0.5% of Medicare Medicaid reimbursements. And particularly when you can think of it as a revenue stream and get more than you used to, wow. This is why this topic has gained strength over the past 2 to 3 years. Here's an analysis that was done probably about 2 years ago. Hospitals face an average value-based purchasing revenue risk of about $890,000 in 2012, and over the course of 5 years, $6.67 million. It's significant. Again, each organization that's on the session here today, you can calculate it in a different way. The bottom line is, it's hitting your piggy bank. So the way it's calculated, I'm not going to get into the details of that, and you can go ahead and go to that, by the way, if you back up on this, and it's in the ebook that you're going to get. The text of the act that created this is available for you to read if you want, and it will help you to understand how this score, value-based purchasing score, is calculated. Bottom line, a score of 70 or higher is needed to maximize your Medicare reimbursements. Guess what? There's a rude awakening. In 2013, the national median value-based purchasing score is 54. Again, the score needed to maximize is 70. Based on clinical measures, you're at 64. Needed to maximize reimbursement on clinical is 81. So look at that. National median, 54 versus 70 for patient satisfaction, 64 versus 81 for clinical. And then when it comes to HCAHPS specifically, 21 being achieved versus the 61 needed to maximize. There's a huge gap. So this was updated as of 2013. So 2013 data. There's a huge gap that needs to be filled. Many more organizations are being penalized than are being incentivized as part of this program. So again, that's the rude awakening. The thing that also I wanted to make sure that everybody understands, and I think I've done it to a pretty good extent, but this really will drive it home, that this is about patient satisfaction, not quality of care. They're not related. If you look at the patient satisfaction, this is 2011, by the way, but I'm just trying to drive home a point. Patient satisfaction rank by state in the middle column, and then quality of care on the right. They're very disparate. The only ones that seem to be in line are maybe Wisconsin and Iowa, which seem to have their quality of care in line with their patient satisfaction. But if you look at the questions that are being asked, it's very, very clear that the patient satisfaction is much more about how they felt about the organization. So who's responsible for ensuring a high-quality patient experience? So a survey was done by Health Leader Media in 2010, asking leaders of healthcare organizations, relative to all the priorities in your organization, where does patient experience rank today? And then again in 5 years. You can see it's a top priority, 35%. They think it'll increase. This is good news. You know, that where it's a top priority or in the top 5, they see it increasing. It's going to have to increase a lot more to close that gap that I just showed you when it comes to financial hit. And what kinds of things are organizations doing? I've heard all kinds of stories about how organizations, healthcare organizations, are trying to make patients feel better about their stay. They're, valet parking. Sometimes they're doing it for free. You can see if that sign, if you look really closely, complimentary for patients. They're improving their food. They're improving their gift shops, making the place more friendly, more clean. But really, when it comes down to it, who really has the primary responsibility for patient experience? Is it the valet guy? Is it the woman behind the counter in the gift shop? And when you survey those same leaders, by far the largest percentage, they say, is multidisciplinary team of leaders, clinicians, and staff. And then you look down the list, maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's the CNO, it's got to be the nurses, right? It's got to be the frontline staff. But when I really think about it, and the topic of today's conversation is this, well, who's missing? Where's HR and recruiting? And again, 3 years ago, people were wondering, what are you talking about, HR and recruiting? This is about the care that nurse techs and nurses and doctors are giving to patients. Well, not anymore, folks. It's coming back and landing on your desk as HR leaders. So impacting the patient experience, and how does it relate to HR? I'm giving you some hints here, and I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. Maybe it's about screening and assessing talent up front. Maybe it's about hiring top talent. Maybe it's about evaluating and training existing talent. Which one of those things could it be? Maybe it's all of those things. So again, I'm looking at my watch again. We are right about where I wanted to be at this point, and we're going to have time for questions as well. So we're right on track. So before I go into detail about how you can impact, let's back up just a little bit and dive into the survey itself. What actually is being measured? And that will help us determine how HR can impact it. First, we need to understand, what are they asking about? Well, they're asking about cleanliness and quietness and discharge information and pain management. There are 8 general categories, but look at the bottom 4. Communication, staff responsiveness. If you've ever been in the hospital, you have had a loved one or a friend or a relative that has been, you know that one of the most important things as you're laying in that bed by yourself, or maybe with a loud roommate next to you, is, will somebody tell me what's going on? When am I going to get my next shot? When is my meal coming? What is going on? It's communication, both before, during, and as you're leaving. What am I supposed to do when I get home? It's communication. So you'll see an abundance of questions in HCAHPS related to communication. But guess what you're not seeing here? Was I cured? Was my issue resolved? So you're not seeing questions about that. Again, we're focusing on HCAHPS and patient satisfaction. So as I said earlier, many of you may already be measuring patient satisfaction. Press Ganey's been out there for a long time doing a fantastic job, but I wanted to highlight the difference. As I said earlier, the HCAHPS scale does have never, sometimes, usually, and always. But as I said, the only one that matters is always. So that's what you have to strive for. It's a very, very high bar. But again, everybody's being measured against it. It's not just your organization when it comes to HCAHPS. Everybody is striving for the always ranking. So just to make that clear. So HCAHPS, as you're starting to gather here, is strongly linked to the behaviors of people interacting with your patients. So then the question becomes, if we have as a goal to improve that interaction, what do? Do we train existing employees to be more communicative, to be more clean, to be more friendly, to be more caring, respectful? Or do we hire people who already have those traits, right? Which one is it, right? Is it training or hiring? You know what? Before I get to, I think it's actually both. I don't think it's fair to say it's one or the other, right? It's really a blend of both. But I think if you want a long-term solution to this, and we've done studies here at SkillSurvey that validate this, and you know this in your heart as well, people are who they are. If I'm inclined to not be a very pleasant person, which I don't think I am, I think I'm a nice guy, but if I'm inclined to not be a very nice guy, you can send me to a seminar for 3 weeks that teaches me to be better and nicer and more friendly. But when I get back on the floor, and I've been there for 3 or 4 weeks, the human tendency is for me to go back to who I was. People are who they are, whether it's good or bad. People who are friendly are friendly. People who are not are not. It's very difficult to change behaviors. You can change skills. It's difficult to change behaviors, competencies, values. So let's agree that it's a combination of both. But let's focus today a little bit more on the long-term solution and say that it's about hiring for HCAHPS excellence. So let's look at some actual questions on the survey and then talk about how you might be able to impact the scores and the answers to these questions. During the hospital stay, how often did nurses treat you with courtesy and respect? These are actual questions, folks. During this hospital stay, how often did nurses listen carefully to you? Look at how these questions are worded. During this hospital stay, after you press the call button, how often did you get help as soon as you wanted it? By the way, that's did, not did. So I have one typo in my entire presentation. Please give me a break. How often did you get help as soon as you wanted it? During this hospital stay, how often did nurses explain things in a way you could understand? Again, communication. How well was your pain controlled? How often did hospital staff describe possible side effects in a way you can understand? You know what? It's almost as if someone asked patients what was important to them to create these surveys. And guess what, folks? That's what they did. These questions are coming from people like you and me who were in a hospital, and they were asked, what was important to you? What did you value when you were there? And these are the things that are being valued. So again, as I said, go to that website, print this out. Print out an actual survey so you understand what's being measured. So what can you do to impact it? Okay, let's give you some ideas. I hate presentations where they present a problem to you and they say, well, good luck with that. That's not today. Today I want to give you some real life things. You don't have to do them all. Maybe if you do one, I'll call this a success today. So let's do one, behavior-based interviewing. If I had you in person here in a room, I'd ask for a show of hands. How many of you use behavior-based interview guides? And to my pleasure, I would say 75–80% of you are probably going to raise your hands. However, when I ask this question, do the questions on your interview guides relate to those on the HCAHPS survey? I get a combination of hands going up, a few, a smattering of those, to, geez, I don't know, boy, I bet they should. Bottom line is more than half don't relate. Maybe by accident they do, but you certainly didn't plan it that way in most cases. And then this sort of rhetorical question, are all managers equally skilled in interviewing? That's one of the most scary topics on the planet from my perspective. The answer to that clearly is no. You have folks that are really good at it, and they focus on things that are relevant to the job and also are risk averse. You're not asking them things about their background, or are they married, how old are they? They're sticking to the script, but you know what? The variation in skill level on that is a little scary. Now, having said that, I think there's tremendous value in behavior-based interviewing. I highly recommend it. If you're not doing it, I would certainly adapt that as part of your game plan on how are you going to find people who already have the behaviors in them that lead to patient satisfaction scores. Because, folks, this is, you can't see me sort of pounding on the desk right now. This is really where this webinar is designed to end up. It is that you as a HR professional are going to have it as your responsibility up front to hire people that you can document are already predisposed to, in their prior jobs, and by assessments you're giving them, have the behaviors and competencies and values that will end up resulting in patients who are thrilled with their experience, right? They're friendly, they're courteous, they're respectful, and you have documentation that says you knew it because you hired them having done an evaluation of those behaviors related to HCAHPS. So what kinds of questions should you ask on those behavior-based interview guides? How do you treat patients with courtesy and respect? Not do you, but how? Give me an example. Give me an example of how you've changed your communication style depending on patient situation. Again, it comes to communication. How do you explain medications and treatment to patients and their families? Again, it's not so much a yes or no question. Those are bad. You know, you want to ask some short essay type questions where they're going to have to give you examples of how they've done that behavior. Again, that's related to the HCAHPS survey. Again, that's why I say print it out and tape it to your wall so you can develop your behavior-based interview guides from those questions. Okay, that was idea one, behavior-based interviewing. How about another idea? How about you actually do some assessments on your candidates? Some of you may or may not be doing those today. I recommend those as well. Maybe not in all job categories, but certainly they have a lot of value. You know, so again, if you were in front of me, I would ask you for a show of hands. How many of you are using behavioral assessments? Typically, I'll see 40 or 50%, and it's generally job related. Maybe for the professional level and above, yes, but not so much for environmental aides, you know, kitchen, environmental techs, you know, that sort of thing. Orderlies, not so much. So again, the next question would be for what jobs? But then the third question is really where the rubber hits the road. Is the assessment you're giving to the candidate tied in any way to HCAHPS behaviors? And that's when I get the hemming and the hawing and the shuffling of the feet, and I'm not sure, I don't know, maybe by accident. Again, put some thought to it and make sure that it does. If you're using an outside vendor, go to them and ask them to make sure that your assessments are assessing those behaviors. Maybe you just need to tweak a few questions. Maybe you need to add quite a few questions. So again, you can build the documentation to show your senior leadership that you're doing your part and bringing on board people that already have those HCAHPS behaviors. So here's the thing I will say, though, about candidate assessments. Number one, they're answered by the applicant. So all the information that you're collecting about the applicant is coming from the applicant, which means it sort of leads to number two. You know, they might be able to be gamed. I've done quite a few assessments in my time, and I tell you, it's just human nature to try and figure out what that question is really getting to. What are they trying to assess? They want to find out if I'm leadership. They want to find out if I work well within a team. They want to find out if I'm creative. All right, so how do I answer this question to highlight that? Instead of just answering it honestly. It's just inevitable that people will tend to do that. Whether it's voluntary or involuntary, pardon me, it's going to happen. Now, the voluntary part of that is they're aggressively out there looking for ways to sort of decode your personality test. There's websites, there's seminars you can go to, there's books you can read that will help you as a candidate sort of gain these assessments. So again, there's all kinds of resources out there that insert some level of unreliability in there. Again, they're really great, but I'm wondering sometimes if they're the best way to go if you want to get a true assessment of whether or not someone had those behaviors in the past. And here's, again, a fill-in-the-blank great idea on how you can really get an assessment of whether or not someone has these behaviors. Because if you really think about it, what's the best way to understand if someone has exhibited those behaviors or will exhibit them for you? It's to have someone tell you that they did it in the past. Did they communicate in the past? Were they friendly in the past? The best indicator of future performance is a solid assessment of past performance. It's in the literature. It's in the science. So if you can figure out if they did it before, odds are very high they're going to do it again for you, good and bad, by the way. So again, imagine you're all in the audience. I'm asking you this question. How many of you require reference checks? In healthcare, it's 95+% of you are doing reference checks. Kudos to you. Then here comes the uncomfortable foot shuffling question. How many of you are tying the questions you ask references to the HCAHPS survey questions? Again, by accident, you may be doing it on occasion, but what I'm suggesting is that you ask specific targeted questions geared toward HCAHPS behaviors. Okay? References are uniquely positioned to evaluate the behaviors of the candidate you're getting ready to hire. Can you think of any better source of information on the candidate you're getting ready to hire than to grab their prior manager, pull them into a corner and say, "Psst, hey, can you just whisper in my ear what they were really like? What were they good at? What were they not so good at? And I promise no one else will know." There's no one else better. You know, I've been, in the workforce for almost 30 years, and I can't think of a better place to find out about somebody I'm getting ready to hire than an honest feedback from their prior manager. So perhaps building it in before you even do or bring them on board. How about use the information that you collect from these prior managers and coworkers to evaluate two things. One, who you're going to bring in for an interview, and two, maybe even affect that interview, right? I talked about behavior-based interview. How about learn from a prior manager and coworker what this person was like, and then gear some questions toward areas that concern you to have a better interview. So as I'm saying here, maybe you're sourcing candidates the way you typically do, down to a top 3 to 5, and you're using resumes and phone interviews, etc., to get them down to maybe the 3 to 5 that you like. Perhaps do a reference assessment, feedback from references and prior coworkers to decide which two actually do come in for an interview to then enhance that interview as well. So that's what I'm talking about, an assessment of your candidate, but from the perspective of people that work with them in the past. There are multiple ways to pull this off. They're typically online, confidential. Confidential, that's big. So the typical reference check today is what? Is a phone call that you're making to somebody. Everybody knows who everybody is, and human nature, you're not so willing sometimes to give truly honest feedback on what someone was like. You're a little skittish about that. They might have been a friend of yours, and you just, a little hesitant about giving solid feedback. But what if I could guarantee you confidentiality? No one would know where you're, that it was you giving the feedback. It's blended in with everyone else. It vastly improves the quality and volume of feedback that you get. It's behavior-centric, meaning do they work well within the team? Can they handle stressful environments? They treat people with honesty and respect, and do they have those HCAHPS behaviors in them already? It's very similar to a 360 that you would give on an existing employee, confidential feedback from managers and coworkers, but it's applied, that concept applied pre-hire, right? So if you understand that, it's easy, efficient, incredibly useful information gathered from a reference. Today, how valuable are references, right? What do you get? You get verification of dates of employment, rehire eligibility, but how often do you get a reference to tell you something so impactful that it changes your mind? That's what this is all about. So again, the process can look like this. SkillSurvey, yes, we do have a process that looks very much like this, where you're entering a candidate into a system. It's all online, triggers an email that goes to the candidate, where the candidate fills out the reference information, takes them less than 5 minutes. The references fill out a survey. Yes, it's an online survey that has behaviors on it that match those HCAHPS behaviors. 85% of references respond, which means you get 4 to 5 people to give you feedback. The reports pop out in 2 days or less. What are you doing with this? You're validating that you have a great candidate. You're potentially avoiding a candidate that doesn't have those behaviors, and maybe you're identifying some areas of weakness that you can deal with, perhaps in onboarding or training, etc., once you get them on board. What does the survey look like? Again, on the left, you're seeing some of those questions straight from the HCAHPS survey. On the right, you're seeing an example of one of these reference assessment surveys that go out to references. Again, behavior-centric. The blue arrows are pointed at questions that relate directly to those HCAHPS behaviors. Those little radio buttons, it's a scale of 1 to 7. 1, I never saw that behavior. 7, I saw it all the time. So you're getting references to tell you, did this person listen carefully to patients in the past? Did they explain things in a way people could understand in the past? Again, past performance is a great predictor of future performance. And how about clustering all of these behaviors into a single report that will show you visually here whether or not this person is already inclined to help you score high on patient satisfaction. These are all questions directly related to patient satisfaction scores, questions on this HCAHPS survey. So you can see going into that, you know what, for question A, listening carefully to patients, question, let's say D, educate patients to inform them. Here's that communication again. And then monitoring patient status for changes, question E. Maybe not so good. I mean, if you've got another candidate that's scoring high or very high when it comes to HCAHPS behavior, maybe you go with the other candidate. Again, you're including this in everything else that you know about this candidate. But if you're going to take HCAHPS seriously and you want to provide documentation to your leadership that you did your part, this is how you can do it. You can say, hey, look, this report is telling me that prior managers and coworkers are telling me this person already has these behaviors. One of the key components as well, we all understand, we've all been in this long enough to know that each of these jobs you see listed here has different behaviors, competencies, and values associated with it. So you need a different survey for each one, you know, and that's what you should have. That's what you should ask for. Physical therapists, pharmacists, pharmacy tech, you know, I'm skipping all over the place, orthopedic tech, phlebotomist, etc., all have different behaviors associated with being, you know, an A+ speech pathologist, for example. So at SkillSurvey, we've been around for 14 years. We've collected data from over 800 hospitals over that time, and we've correlated it with HCAHPS behaviors. This is an aggregation of data for 119,000 candidates, RN candidates, specifically RN candidates, measured against HCAHPS-related behaviors only. So coming out of the gate, you've got, I'd say that's about 90% coming out with high scores, which you might expect. You've weeded them out. You've probably got a good crop of people. But then you've got what? Maybe about 8 to 10% that are coming out with moderate risk. They've got areas of potential low scoring behaviors. You need to decide whether or not you want to bring them on. Maybe you can deal with it in the onboarding process. But then very, very typical across the board of all healthcare organizations we work with, about 5 to 8% of the time, candidates that looked great on paper, may have sounded great over the phone and even in an interview. But prior managers and coworkers are telling you from HCAHPS perspective, you're in trouble. You know, you're getting ready to bring somebody on board that's going to negatively affect HCAHPS scores. And what does that mean? Money. It means Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements. So again, it's all about documentation, science, metrics, etc. So again, I'm looking at my watch again. We're going to have, I'm right on time. This is great. That's about as on time as I've been in these webinars I've done. So this is great. So there's a number of things that I would suggest. This is a walk away. So what are the 2 things I said already that I think you should walk away with? 1, that website. So you can go take a look and do some comparisons. See how your hospital looks today. Track it over time. Those scores are updated on a quarterly basis, by the way. Check it once a quarter. See how your hospital's doing. See if you're having an impact, by the way. What I say is number 2. Number 2, go print that survey out. Design your behavior-based interviewing against it. Make sure your candidate assessment vendor is gearing their questions against HCAHPS. And then what did and this is number 3. This slide here. Again, this stuff is in the ebook you're all going to get. But this is your little guidebook, right? Know what is measured. Understand and have that survey taped to your wall. Know what your scores are. Know where you're lacking. So again, if you know that communication is an area that your organization is low in right now, maybe you ought to focus on bringing people on board that are high in those areas. Tell your senior management, I understand the problem. I know what HCAHPS is. I know what our scores are. Get yourself a seat at the table. You know, you're, as HR professionals, I know what our scores are, I know where we're low, and here's what I'm doing to help fix it. I'm going to bring people on board that are doing better in communication based on past performance. So again, apply behavior evaluation to your hiring process. I gave you 3 ideas on how to do that.